Hello, my name is John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from Northern British Columbia in beautiful, the capital of Northern British Columbia, Prince George. Today is a special day. We have a special guest, Shannon Keeping. Shannon, I've known you for a number of years already, and it's my pleasure to have you today. Tell me a little bit about your background. You were born in Eastern Canada, and you lived there for quite a while.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Newfoundland, in a little town called Port-aux-Basque. It's about 4,000 people in that community.
What is the community called again?
Port-aux-Basque.
Port-aux-Basque.
Yeah, it stands for the Basque of the Fishermen.
Okay.
So that's where the Basque fishermen landed first in Port-aux-Basque, and that's how it got its
Lots
name.
of history, huh?
Yeah, lots of history back east for sure.
And you still have family there?
Yes, my parents are still there. I have a sister there, and I come from a big family. My dad has my nan raised or gave birth to 17 kids.
Wow.
14 of them survived.
Wow.
So I've got tons of family back east.
Yeah. So and how long did you live there?
Me?
Yeah.
I left Newfoundland when I was about 21 years old. Yeah.
And then what did you do from there?
First I went to university at age 18. I went to Memorial University back east in Newfoundland. I went there for about 2 years. I decided to come here for a summer. My sister, Vanessa.
Here meaning?
Here in Prince George, yeah.
Oh, why Prince George?
My sister lived here.
Okay.
So I thought that I'd come for a visit that summer, get a summer job, and then we'll go back east.
And the rest is history.
Well, I went back east for another year of university.
Okay.
But that summer I got on a train and I came here by train all across the country, which was a really neat experience.
Yeah.
Went back to university back east, and then I decided with the new university here, UNBC, they had openings or spots preserved for provincial admissions for social work.
Okay. So what did you take initially when you went to university in Newfoundland?
I started with general studies because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of, I thought I was going to go into education, like teacher or social work or psychology. I wasn't really sure what I wanted.
Yeah.
But then I landed on social work.
So social work is a broad spectrum,
It's very
right?
broad, yeah.
And then, so you got that, studied that in Newfoundland, and then you came here.
Yeah.
And then fortunately we have UNBC.
Yes.
And you were there for...
Yeah. I went to school there for 2 years where I applied for the social work program here at UNBC and then graduated here in 1999.
And you graduated with?
A Bachelor of Social Work degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what exactly is that?
Well, social work is, like I said, it's very broad. You can do a lot of things. You can do counseling, you do child protection, you could do applications for fostering and set those kind of things up. You can do psychiatric social work, you can do hospital social work. It's very broad. Mental health and addictions. It's a very broad degree, which is kind of nice because you can find your niche.
So, and then from that, you decided to go into, once you finished university, then
I did child protection for 5 years. So that includes investigating. I did frontline or investigative pieces of it. So so we'd get a child protection report. So I'd be the one going to family homes, doing the investigation and assessments. Then make a decision whether, we had to find alternative places for children to help
Special
families.
with younger people?
Under age 19. Mm-hmm. Anywhere from 0 to 19 years of age.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we would also work with families to help return to home plans. Because the goal is always to have families home with their biological family and not in care of the foster system.
Right.
So once we've removed, we would then work with the families with whatever issues they were experiencing in their private life.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so your employer is Northern Health?
Not then, but right now it is. Yes. At that time, it was MCFD. So at the time, I had a keen interest in mental health issues.
Okay.
So I was the liaison for Northern Health, the Adolescent Psychiatric Assessment Unit.
Right.
So I would go there for regular grand rounds meetings, help with assessments, help with various number of things.
Right.
And then eventually they opened a position which they hired me into, which was, they call it a waitlist management clinician.
Okay.
So really what that means is I would do all the pre-assessments before any youth between the ages of 12 and 18 would come in for an assessment in a psychiatric facility.
So now you're employed by Northern Health.
Yes, yeah.
In particular, mental health.
Yes.
And specializing in young persons from 12 to 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the category, right?
From the unit that I work on is between 12 to 18, but we also work with our pediatric units.
You call them youth or
youth?
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, my unit specifically is between the ages of 12 and 18, but our team also works with our pediatric unit. And what that means is often the hospital is over capacity a lot of times. So if there's someone who comes in with mental health concerns, and if there's no spot on the adolescent psych units, often they'll be put on the pediatric unit. So we'll support the pediatric unit with the concerns.
Just to understand it a little bit better, because mental health is such a huge issue now, but it always was, right?
Yeah.
Is it now more in the public awareness than it used to be?
I believe so. Like, I believe that a lot of stigma had a place for that, and I think that some of the old-fashioned values of like suck it up, deal with it kind of thing was there like years ago. And even my experience of, like, I've worked for Northern Health and mental health for 18 years now. And when I first started...
18 years?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So when I first started there, the youth didn't come in with such chronic issues as we're seeing now. And the numbers have increased quite significantly since the beginning of my career working in mental health and addictions.
So just to kind of understand it a little bit better, like... I'm used, like most people, we know something about mental health, but not all that much.
Right.
That happens usually to other people, not to us, we think.
Right.
And then on the other hand, the mental health could be a broad spectrum that may end up in an emergency situation where. But I kind of think about is that people are so desperate that they want to end their lives.
Yes. Yeah.
And then from there on in we go to the other end of the spectrum where I remember one period in my life that I had anxiety and so that I felt like my chest was like this, and then I went to the doc and they...
I'm having anxiety now.
Oh, you shouldn't. I'm your friend, So, but that I have the anxiety, and then they prescribed to me Xanax.
Oh, yeah.
That's quite addictive.
Yeah.
So this was years ago, but fortunately at one point, I had that, and then I stopped, but that was not easy was quite addictive.
Yeah.
And that was probably 20 years ago or something. But at the same time, we know virtually on a daily basis that we encounter people that have a form of mental health or anxiety or anything from that extreme to the other.
Well, how I like to look at it is mental wellness. So people exercise for their physical health. We might take medications if we have a heart disease or, a variety of things like a lot of medical issues. But people often don't reach out for help for their mental health or mental wellness. And they like to hide it because of the stigma. I think that over the last maybe 10 years, and this is just my opinion, 10 or 15 years, I think that it's been more public, and I don't know if the internet piece to play in making people more aware of mental health and being mentally well and what that looks like, and reducing that stigma. So I feel like people are more willing to say, you know, I'm suffering through some depression. It's situational. It's not biological right now, and so might need medication for a short term. And then there's other people who might have like a chemical imbalance, and they may need more longer term treatment. Which also, medications is not everything. It's not the be-all for any treatment for mental health. It also includes a lot of therapy and counseling. A lot of people, from what we see a lot of times, is they often think that, or feel that, you know, if I take a medication for anxiety, or I take a medication for depression, or schizophrenia, those kind of things, they will help for sure, but there's other things that we need to do around that, which is really the therapy, and that's where the hard work is for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so do we have facilities where people can be treated and diagnosed, and then from there on in, as you already said, medication or give them pills of some sort is not necessarily the solution. There may well be other reasons underlying.
Yeah.
Is then the objective to find why that person is what they are?
Absolutely. So when I'm speaking about youth, when you're talking about an assessment and diagnosis, a lot of time we'll have youth come into the unit that I work on, and that is actually what we do. We do assessment and diagnosis, and we offer recommendations for treatment for community. Refer to community agencies, and then we also do crisis stabilization. So those are the ones that, like you just mentioned, the suicidality.
And crisis stabilization means that it's pretty serious, right?
Usually it means that they've already had an assessment, went through our assessment process. We have a treatment plan. Sometimes things happen in their life that they are struggling with, some trauma, and they feel suicidal sometimes, or they're just not able to regulate their own emotions, and they get overwhelmed. And there's times that sometimes, not always, they lead to feeling suicidal, and then self-harm is a big one for youth. And then they'll come to our unit, they'll end up coming to our hospital, and with that, a psychiatrist will do a consultation, and if needed to come into our unit, we'll take the youth in and stabilize them, whether it's with just removing them from like all of the triggers in community, just to give them a break for what's going on, or looking at medications and doing adjustment, or just giving them 72 hours to like.
So say for instance now that and especially in the category that you particularly specialize in, youth 12 to 18, I have this feeling that I need help kind of a thing. How then do they end up at the right place and saying, or, that, and I'm just kind of hypothetically thinking that, I go through these feelings, not me, but hypothetically speaking, a individual, say 12, 14, 16, already is such a difficult period in anybody's life, right? Male, female as well, that we go through these anxieties about, the pressures that are put on us for all kinds of reasons, and then young people end up in a situation where they become panicky. Do they then come directly to the hospital or somebody? At what point that somebody, because I can see that there would be shame attached to it. Do I knock on somebody's door and I say I need help, or how do you for the average lay individual? I have this friend, son, daughter, and they going through that, and I cannot connect with them as a parent.
Right.
How can I get help for them, because I'm scared that they going to do something that may not be good.
Right.
What do I do?
Right. That's difficult, and I think each individual is different. So when we're talking about youth, I think often their parents will help with them to get to where they need. So I think you're talking about like every door is the right door is what we would ideally like to say, but there's so many systematic issues around the idea of every door is the right door. And so what I mean by every door is the right door is like, so I'm a youth, I'm struggling with whatever mental health issue I'm having. I go down to Foundry, which is it's just across the street here, who works with youth with mental health and substance misuse issues. But they're a walk-in, and they don't have a long-term counselor there. So each day you go in, so they will then try to refer you to someone who's can do therapy long-term. So that's what we mean by every door is a right door. So if somebody walked into Intersect as a youth, they'll do their intake assessment, and then if they don't fit for that program, like I'll say if they're having a psychotic break, they wouldn't fit for that program, then they would refer to our first break program that's in town, and so they'll see a psychiatrist and get that assessment through that team. And if it's primary addictions, they can go to the YCOS program that we have here. So it's youth community outreach program, so the clinicians will go out and meet the youth where they're at, build a lot of rapport, work with them, and then try to work with them usually with a harm reduction lens, or we'll meet the youth where they're at. If they want abstinence, then we'll work with that. So that's kind of like the way. So each door that a youth will walk into, ideally that agency will either hold them and offer the services if that's appropriate, or they would refer them to a more specialized program.
So what can a parent do that has concern about their child that is going through difficult times, whatever they may be, but they don't know exactly what it is, and
Right.
they're not connecting at some period in their lives? I'm sure most kids go through that.
Yeah.
And parents go through that, and then and then if that goes beyond just a difficult period, but then you kind of hopefully in the family kind of settle it down. If that does not work, what comes to mind is maybe counseling for a parent.
Yeah.
That way you can pay for fee for service. Those services are available.
Yeah.
At what point do I go to the government,
Right.
and say I need help?
Right. So when you're talking about the government, I first of all, I want to say really happy that you brought up families and their work that has to occur when they're working with their youth or their child, regardless of the age. So there's programs for families. So one of them is we have a Family Smart program here in Prince George. So if a family struggles with their youth with mental health issues, and it's very challenging for families. So there's no right answer here and there's no wrong answer, but I think that them reaching out for their own counseling services, there's family mediation that they can access, I believe, through Intersect, and also MCFD, so that's the child protection, because not all youth needs child protection even if they go to that door, and that would be the government services, and sometimes they might be able to offer supports for that family depending on the situation. The government unfortunately don't offer supports financially for youth to go into a certain program, with the exception of if they get diagnosed with autism, they can
Autism is what?
Autism is, don't quote me on this, but essentially the symptoms looks like, not socially awkward. They could be really smart, but socially awkward, don't make good eye contact, doesn't do well with their peers, no friends, that sort of thing. Will often fixate on one thing. Like often you'll see a young child, and as we diagnose younger, or the symptoms show up younger, often you'll see them like in the corner and they'll fixate on one thing over and over and over again, like that sort of thing. So that's essentially a lot of the symptoms. So youth they'll also sometimes have like tic disorder, so it varies as well as on a spectrum, right?
So a lot of times, Shannon, the more informed the parent is,
Yeah.
the better it will be for them, to diagnose and to build that relationship between parent and child, right?
Yeah. So for example, I'll use the unit that I work on the adolescent unit. We have a social worker who's called a family liaison worker. So a lot of what she does is like she'll do a family assessment, see what's going on in the home, see where there are gaps where we can help support the family.
Does that happen by invitation then, or does the person say, I need help, and could you then the caseworker would then volunteer to come into the home setting? Is that
our family liaison don't go into homes, so the family assessment looks more like a lot of phone calls. Family come to us. We do a lot of interviews, conversations, that sort of thing.
Right.
So we get a little bit of a bigger picture of what's going on for the youth and the family, and then we'll offer support services for the family, see where they're at in terms of wanting to or able to deal with their own kind of struggles. One thing that we do notice is a lot of families, we're going to talk about generational and systematic issues, and we can use the Aboriginal I can't think of the word right now, but essentially lots of systematic. So when they were removed from their culture, they have a lot of issues around that. Then it's transferred to their own children. So it just gets carried down, as most people know. But I can't remember where I was going with that. So a lot of times we'll work with trauma, and we'll see a lot of trauma. So we'll work and try our best to get the families connected to deal with and to have supports around their own issues.
Yeah.
And often once the family works with their own struggles, then sometimes we'll see the youth do better.
Yeah, to get the guidance in particular, and I can see in the Aboriginal community that they have, and I have lots of friends in the Aboriginal community, and I know they obviously historically have had major challenges, and more of that is coming to the foreground, which is helpful for everybody. But still, we see still far too many issues and problems there where they are not getting the help it appears that they require. Are we doing enough of funding?
No.
And is funding provincial or is it federal? Where does the funding come from?
I think mostly provincial, but no, we don't have enough funding to meet the needs of the youth. So for example, the unit that I have in the hospital, we're in northern, so we work with the youth in all of northern, not just Prince George.
So what is your area that you are working in?
So this is where I always get them mixed up, but so Quesnel that way, then there's like Terrace, Kitimat, all the way that way, Dawson Creek.
So you virtually are doing everything in northern British Columbia that may be 100 and 200
and the small communities.
I'm saying miles, 300 kilometers north, south, east, all over the place. And so all of that is kind of managed from the Prince George region?
Well, the acute stuff, meaning if a youth shows up at a hospital in their home community, then we liaise and work with that hospital and often transfer them to our hospital to get the services, because there's no psychiatrists in the region. A lot of times, or you might get a few, or some hospitals they might have an adult psychiatrist, but they don't have a youth psychiatrist, and youth psychiatry is a little bit more specialized.
How come we don't have more, and especially mental health so critically important?
I know.
How come that? I know it's lack of funding, but do we not have the specialties, or do we not have people that are being trained, or is the training too extensive to get enough people into the system where they are?
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I definitely know that there's not enough psychiatrists, and also when it comes to counselors and social workers in the smaller communities in the north, often like some of the youth will have to travel from one community to another just to get the services they need, because the counselor they had may have been there for a year or 2 years and then they move, because often a lot of people don't want to be in those small communities, so then they move. So the youth gets a lot of people moving through their life, and so then eventually they just don't want to deal with it.
Especially in Aboriginal communities where the frequency of occurrence is higher, and I say that positive, not being critical.
Yeah.
But then, can more be done in those communities to have people with skill sets that are helpful for, managing part of those issues?
So we're trying to mitigate that as best we can, and one of the ways that we're trying to do that is we work with BC Children's right now. So let's say someone in Dawson Creek, a youth presents at hospital, and they're having some issues. So we can, instead of them, we have the youth transfer and drive all the way to Prince George, where they're away from their families and their loved ones and their school.
That's not good.
No, it's not good. So what we try to do is we work with BC Children, and we do virtually. So that's one of the good things that came out of COVID, I think, for us, is virtually we'll do the assessments, and so we'll have this child psychiatrist from BC Children's virtually be online. We'll set it up with that hospital, and they'll do a full assessment that way, make recommendations, and often that youth then don't need to come to Prince George, so they can stay in their own community.
So, from my layman perspective, but caring and loving, you would say the closer they stay to their family and their familiar environment, the better. Mm-hmm. And the skill sets, respectfully, are important. But if they have to go away from where they are familiar with, I'm not so sure that would be a good idea to do that, even if I may be simplifying things, but saying, what can we do to give more ability for these communities to manage themselves?
Yeah.
And by saying we should do a selection of individuals that have the respect and that have the ability to at least manage part of it, to keep the individuals safe and knowing that they are cared for and helping inside the community. Wouldn't that be step number one? That would be in mind.
That would be, absolutely. And I think that's where we were trying, because we have the psychiatrists, we have some of those services. That's where we are trying to support those communities so that they build capacity for themselves to be able to manage some of the suicidal ideation that sometimes, or the self-harming behavior that a lot of youth struggle with. So we build capacity that way as best we can, but I don't know what the answer is. Like, there's only so much that we can do, and MCFD, they under their umbrella is Child Youth Mental Health Services, so that's where their funding would come through, and that would be the government and provincial government. But I think it's about retention and bringing people in who's wanting to work there and staying.
You see, the step number one, in my opinion, is, and I kind of feel that right across the board, is a lot of times that the training of somebody to the level where they are considered to be an expert in the field, by the time we are there, they're not interested in living in a small community solving problems. Yeah. They can get a job someplace else that is much better for them. And I don't fully understand it, because what we're looking for first and foremost, the people that are caring and have the ability to gain respect from other people by that at least they can have a dialogue, and where there are family issues, and help in the families, to identify those areas where, if it is critical, then obviously something else has to be done. But in most cases, where they know that there is compassion and love and caring and all those very basic things, is the most important thing. You don't have to go to for God knows how many years to university.
Yeah.
I say that respectfully, but
absolutely.
but if there is a crisis, and I've heard that not only from you, from others as well. We have, mental health is one of the main issues today that we as a population are dealing with, and we're not doing a good job on it.
I don't believe that we are. And I think that's a lot because we don't have the services or access to those services.
Then it becomes a question of what are those services, and are we demanding too much in terms of, what is the objective of the services if we can already be close to problems, and the simple solutions are a lot of times at least step one, to know that the person is protected first and foremost, the well-being, and the second one, that people care about them, and somehow, I'm probably simplifying this.
No, you're absolutely right. That's what it does come down to at the end of the day.
Because if you
attachment stuff, right?
Yeah, even a person like yourself that is an expert in your field, as many others are, and that, but you bury them into that, you can't even come up for air because there are so many cases approaching you that then virtually becomes impossible to properly manage. And then it becomes a question of, since we have difficulty in doing that, what can we do collectively in terms of saying what is plan B, C, and so that at least we can do a better job in terms of being in those communities, and
more people. Like, it really comes down to more people. And I think that, for example, some of the really small northern communities, if they get a social worker or a counselor, a mental health counselor in their community, often they are tasked with multiple jobs that one social worker should be doing, that the capacity. So they might be doing protection, they might be doing counseling, they might be doing all the referrals, they might be doing like the adoption stuff at the same time. Like there's a lot of different hats that they just get burnout. When you talk about burnout, that's what happens a lot of times, and then they move.
And then it discourages people, they leave because they simply can't do it. Otherwise they become one of the cases. Because there's only so much you can do.
Well, they get burnt out for sure, and probably need to leave, or I mean, it just becomes unmanageable mostly.
So where do we go from here in terms of, because that's what we're doing right now, you and me sitting here talking about mental health. You're an expert in the field, and I as a concerned citizen have been watching it. I see it every day. I look at the George Street and I see people living in tents, and a lot of them are First Nations, and then we building buildings and then wanting them to live there, but that's not what they want. We are not being responsive. And then I look at the jails, a lot of people in jail, and the reason that they are there is simply because of mental issues or drugs or something, non-violent crimes in a lot of cases, and
issues.
And so do we have to be more proactive as a community, and not saying, well, I don't see anything, there are no problems, or but what do other places do? Like I've traveled all over the world, and I think there is some areas where they are, and not being critical of us. I love where we are. I love Prince George and all the other things around it, for sure. But what can we learn from others where they are being more proactive?
Good question.
Because the problem is not going to disappear.
No, problem's not going to disappear.
It's going to increase,
it's going
not
to increase,
decrease.
exactly. And as we become more aware of and supportive of mental health and the stigma is reducing, we're going to get more people needing those services.
Yeah.
So again, it comes back to funding. It comes back to more jobs that are manageable, I think. We need people and money doing the jobs.
Is that...
And also resources such as housing. Like housing, when you talk about a lot of people on the streets right now who's got concurrent disorders, usually, you know, mental health and addictions, typically, not always. Housing is a big thing. Access to food is like, you know, your baseline of what we all need as people. Like, and it makes it more difficult to like recover and to, you know.
But I feel a lot of times from what I hear, but I don't know that, but a lot of people from the outlying communities are coming here, but it brings them in closer to the medical system and some of the other support maybe that they would be getting. On the other hand, you know, drugs obviously increasingly is a problem. You know, people are how do you call the toxic drugs that a lot of young people and people in general are dying because of the drugs.
Yeah, and have them laced with other things. I honestly don't know what the answer is.
No.
Yeah, I don't.
No.
And that's something that I think that is an ongoing conversation within services.
Yeah.
It's like, what can we do different? How do we support the outlying regions? How do we support youth and families? Even adults, right? Because our youth then transition into adulthood. And then if they don't have the skills as a youth to start transitioning, it just continues often in their adult life, which often leads to poverty, you know, not having access to treatment, housing, transportation, all of the things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then, you know, and again, you know, there are no easy answers for it, you know, so
it's quite complex, actually.
Yeah.
It sounds simple, but it's quite complex.
So in the 17, 18 years that you've been, is it about 17, 18 years you've been involved in it? You know, you see any improvements in that point that you say, well, if I kind of look back, I think this part has gotten better. We should maybe do more of that. Or
I
not
would
really?
say, absolutely. I would say that things have gotten better. I think that we've done a lot of work and collaborating with other services. That is also, you know, they're also the experts. And I think that we've done our best to provide more education for our frontline workers as best we can. And sometimes we'll even do it collaboratively and offer those educations outside. I also think that we have worked really hard on trying to build capacity within our regional community so that they can have this, you know, they can feel supported to have some of the skills that require for some of the acute system stuff. So I think that so we're also looking at having what we were calling a tower. So for example, our unit, the adolescent psych unit, they've got 6 beds for the whole north, not enough beds. So we're looking at moving our facility to a new facility with hopefully more beds and access to services in that way.
That's a positive
so
sign.
So that's really good. The other thing that we have been working on is our EPI program. So our early intervention program usually deals with psychiatric issues, so psychosis, bipolar, schizophrenia, all of those big diagnoses. They are working with having people hired in some of the other communities and working with our psychiatrists. That's not up and going yet, but that's something that we're working on for sure.
So that's positive.
So there's been lots of positives and lots of work, and I mean the pendulum always swings as well. So we try this and this doesn't work. Sometimes you try this and you know that works. So like most things, the pendulum typically swings.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that you know, you have a son.
Yes. I have a boy.
And I watched your Facebook, and you're proud to say that he joined grade 11.
Oh yes, he
I
just
saw
started
that,
grade 11.
and
Yeah.
and I know him quite well because we in the Brink group of company for quite a number of years already, we select number of people, younger, older, that are under the radar somewhat, that are athletes in different fields, including individuals that became Olympians, and it's always amazing to me in the last 3-4 years that we have done that athlete of the month, and then we give them usually $500 a month, and then they stay as part of the Brink group team, and so Brendan was part of the Brink group team because he's a very able, capable boxer.
Yeah.
And he's very good at it and very dedicated.
Yes. I'm very proud of him, of course.
Well, you should be.
Yeah, so Braden, he started very young, started with judo when he was like 5 years old, I think. He did that for a year. Then he moved into karate. His dad has his black belt in karate, so he followed his father's lead.
Yeah.
So we had put him into karate at that time, and he got his green belt in that, but he was finding that karate wasn't what he really wanted because there's no contact. So he wanted something and karate was such a great base for him to get started. Then COVID happened, and a lot of things, as you know, went away.
It changed everything. Yeah.
But he was fortunate to find an activity which is jiu-jitsu, and he was able to join that with adults. They were all adults. He was the only youth. He was 14, 15 at the time. 14. And so he did that for about a year and a half, where he was practicing jiu-jitsu, and he got his stripes within 3 months, like 2 stripes on his belt, whereas others didn't really have them yet, and they've been in it for like a year or more. So very proud of that, but he always wanted to do boxing. So then he joined this, and there was only one club in Prince George that soon after closed down once he was I can't remember the name of that club. And
because of COVID.
I'm not sure if it was strictly because of COVID. I'm not really sure.
Because when I don't know if it was still COVID or not, when we selected him as the athlete of the month, and we went down, and there was a very, very dedicated trainer, and had converted his garage because of COVID into a boxing rink, and I had the opportunity to box, train a little bit with Brendan, and he's a good guy, and he's very, very good, very dedicated.
Yeah, so his coach, that's Chase you're talking about. So Chase actually trained at this other boxing club. So then when that shut down, he decided that he would create his own club. And like I said, he transformed and Braden's been there ever since, and loving it. Every day when I'm home, he's always punching at me, kicking at me. Don't touch me. Like, he's so good. I just don't flinch anymore because I know he wouldn't touch me. But it's constant. I'm like, Braden, do that with your dad, not me.
No, it's so important, for young people to be exposed to sports, interacting with others. And I kind of look at myself when I grew up in Holland. I was born during the Second World War, but then after the war, it took a while for everybody to kind of get back to a sense of normality. I was born in 1940, so I was 5 years old when the war ended. And then my dad hadn't been part of the family for 5 years. And then I had a sister 1 year older, brother 2 years older than me. So the three of us, and my mom kind of got through the war. And then after they came back again, families that have been ripped apart during war, it takes time to repair and put them back together, and they never be quite the same because of the hardship and all the other things. But in any event, I had the ability to go and play soccer and judo and do a number of other things. The other part that happened to me is that in Holland then is that there was a draft so that when I was 18, when I was 17, I got a medical for joining either the Army, Navy, or Air Force, and I wanted to be a pilot. So I was able to apply for the Air Force, but they didn't make me a pilot. I became Special Forces of all things. I don't know why, because I was not big or anything like that. It must have been because I had a brown belt in judo. Whatever good that does me, But the point that I was going to make is that when at 18, when you're at the age that you think you know it all, then you go into the Air Force, Army, into your training camp. Mine was 6 months, because very severe training. You end up in a room, 2-level beds, with 40 other guys that think they know it all. And then you get up in the morning at 5 o'clock, because that's what somebody tells you to do, and you start training. Quite an experience.
Oh, I bet.
I think very good, actually, if I kind of look back at it.
Really good for structure and routine and responsibility.
All of that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very good.
And very good for someone with ADHD that you're very public about.
Huh?
And very good for someone with ADHD that you're very public about.
Yeah.
That kind of structure is definitely a benefit for you, I would imagine. Yeah.
I felt about 4 or 5 years ago, that I didn't know about my ADHD until I was 57.
Yeah.
And I read it in the book and I said, oh my God, that is me.
That's me to a T.
And then from there on in, it took me another 5 years before I talked to my doctor about it. And, and he was the family doctor, a friend, a family doctor, but I was ashamed of it.
Yeah.
And then I talked to him about it. I always remember I came into his office and he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I don't know, but I think I got ADHD. He said, oh my God. And then so we went kind of through it together, and he had some knowledge about it. He said, I think you do too. And then it took me probably quite a period of time until I started looking at it in Google, and I kind of thought about it. I didn't feel good about it, but it kind of explained a lot of stuff about me. Yeah. I failed grade 3. Who fails grade 3, really? And I failed grade 7 3 times. And then finally it took me out of school and said, well, do we send him to a mentally challenged school or do we get him a job? So they sent me to a factory, and I became a furniture maker. And, but kind of looking back, what I did is, then the other thing that I should say about it is that then, I think it was in 2008 or something like that, quite a number of years ago, I went to my doc and I said to my doc, should I have, about the ADHD, you think I should have medicine? He said, I don't know, I said, I read about Adderall or something like that, and he said, well, we can prescribe you. So prescribed me 100 pills, and then I had 3 of them, and they're still in my drawer 20 years later. That 97, they didn't do nothing for me.
Right.
The point that I want to make is this one about that, is that the more I got to know about it, then the more I felt it was an asset to me, not a liability. Yeah. And that I was just as good as anybody else, and in some case uniquely different because I have ADHD. Right. That allowed me to do all kinds of things that normally other people didn't do. Right. And and so I started becoming much more public about it. Right. And I spoke about it in particular 4 or 5 years ago when, can you imagine that I failed grade 7 3 times, and then I got my doctorates of laws from the University of Northern British Columbia. Right. Can you imagine that? I think that speaks to formal education really don't mean a lot sometimes. And that's a good point, right? Yeah. So in any event, from there then I knew I had to be more public about it. So I did a couple of things. I wrote a book, Against All Odds, and Against All Odds, in particular, the reason that I'm looking for, it's here, this one. So, Against All Odds, and I always say about all odds, that's interesting. I say it took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, and 2 years to write it.
Wow.
So several times during that 20 years to think about it, I started to write it, and then this kind of disappeared again, and then again, and again, and again. And then I thought about 2, 3, 4 years ago, if I'm not going to do it now, it will not happen.
Right.
And the other part about it that I wanted to do, this is not hoorah, hoorah, John, he has these 12 companies and he employs so many people and he is this, that, and no,
For
it's
someone
not
who failed grade 3 and 7 2 times.
Yeah.
I got all that.
Exactly. And it's all about regard of all the things that happen, including the war and the PTSD and the inner child, the fear of losing my mother, and during the war, the only one that was protecting us, and then ADHD.
Yeah.
I felt I had to write about it and saying, in spite of all of that and all the other things that happen in between, and then at one point with drinking too much and all the other kind of things, I kind of put it all out there. But regardless of all of that, but staying the course and still being, as they say, successful, I felt I had to write about that, and more or less saying, partially, if I can do it, anybody can do it after that challenge, And
exactly.
then when I came here, I had, you can see it here, my $25.47 in my pocket. But underneath it, what it says is that attitude, passion, work ethic, and what follows that is success. The $25.47 is what I had in my pocket when I came off the bus about 2 blocks away from here in 1965. I felt when I left Holland, I dreamed of going to Canada. I dreamed about building a lumber company, but the most important thing is that I failed. I felt I had failed. And so I had to start anew, and I knew I could do it. In order to do it, I had to start with nothing, come down all the way down here, and see if I could do it on my own.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, I'm going to either have a sawmill, or if I cannot become successful there, I will not go back to Holland unless I'm successful or in the box. And a little bit radical in my opinion, but but looking back at it, so that's what the book is all about.
Right. Yeah.
And then I felt I had to do something else as well. Then about ADHD, which I believe what's important is that, I think it sits here, and so I wrote this one about ADHD 2 years ago, and started with that, and then it was a bit of a challenge. Regardless of grade 7, I'm a very good writer. I always knew that in some form or fashion. So and in any event, I felt I had to write about it, and then I wanted to write the book ADHD Unlocked in such a way that even if somebody with ADHD who loses attention fairly quickly and become bored, so you can open it up anywhere, can start and then go to some other pages, and it is that kind of a book. Yeah. But it also deals with about 10 or 12 people we interviewed that have ADHD and tell us about their experiences. Mm-hmm. And the foreword was written by a good friend of mine and yours, is Tracy Lotz.
Yes.
And for our guests from around the world that are watching this, Tracy Lotz is a medical doctor in Prince George, very good one actually, and probably I take the liberty of saying that one of the most popular ones in Prince George, with all due respect to the other ones, but in an emergency doc, and she has ADHD, and she was so good and kind to write the foreword to the book. Yeah. And so what I did is that I think this one is here, and then I have one for you, and I thought I signed this one already for Shannon Didn't I give you the book for Shannon? Okay,
No.
to Shannon. So I'm going to give you a copy of the book,
Okay, I appreciate that.
and I'll leave it with you.
Perfect. Thank you very
Thanks,
much. Awesome.
And so, kind of looking back to our podcast, you were quite nervous coming in, but you feel good now. I hope
yeah,
you do. You feel
yes,
good?
I'm calmer now.
Okay, but that's what I want,
Yeah.
because you're my friend first and foremost.
Yeah.
So the discussions about mental health are so critically important.
Yes.
We covered a lot of places, and I think that we, as a province, as individuals, have to be more aware of it, and being aware of it that we have to, that it will not go away, it will be with us.
Yeah.
The more we understand as a public about it, and then wherever possible help and understand the situation, that we still have a bit of a ways to go.
Yes.
And for those people that have committed so much of their life to it, like you have, it's not an easy job, and I thank you for the service.
Yeah, thank you. And I thank you for writing books like this, because this does reduce stigma, and then people will talk as well, and as well as Tracy for doing the forward, because she talks about her own experience.
Yes.
And when you get professionals like that, then that will reduce some stigma for some people who may be struggling with ADHD. So thank you as well for that.
And it's not a disease, or it's not a disorder, it's a superpower.
Yeah.
That's how I call it.
Yeah.
Everything is possible.
Yeah.
Shannon, thank you.
Thank
I'm
you
going
for
to give you a
having
big
me.
hug after.
Okay.
Thanks, Shannon, for being my guest.
Thank you.
Yeah.